Los Angeles' homeless crisis is the worst in the entire nation, with about 60,000 people lining the streets every day. LA Mayor Eric Garcetti has even declared homelessness in this city a state of emergency. How do you solve this pandemic? Sustainable housing is what most homeless experts agree is the best solution. However, it's not that simple. We must first understand why housing for the homeless is a sustainability issue. These days, sustainability is not just about preserving things like energy or the environment. Today, sustainability is about preserving all resources. Human beings are a resource. Housing is a resource.
Housing to me is the prism through which we refract almost every other issue. So if we're talking about sustaining life in Los Angeles and California, traffic, the air we breathe, the poverty people experience, homelessness, even things like public safety, they're all related to whether or not we can house people and house them in decent, clean, sustainable, affordable housing.
We begin with a walk through LA's Skid Row, where there are 4,000 homeless people in a 50-block radius who call these encampments home. Skid Row has morphed into its own city. You can't really comprehend the enormity of the homeless tragedy here unless you basically spend a day like we did talking to these people of the pavement, many of whom are stuck here with no way out. These tents and the broken concrete are their living room, dining room, kitchen. On a good day, they have water, toothpaste, a toothbrush. 53-year-old Nikki Gagnon lived out here on the streets of LA.
My husband and I came here from Las Vegas thinking that we had an apartment, and when we got here it was just way too expensive to live, and we tried to get into one of the shelters and they were full.
How bad is it out here on the street?
Someone who could be your friend at 6 o'clock at night can be fiending for drugs and at midnight kill you because they know you have a couple dollars in your pocket that they want.
Did you have ever imagined that you would be living on the street homeless?
At 48, my mom died and I lost my mind. I had a nervous breakdown, and that's the first time I actually became homeless. I lost my house, my school, my career, everything. My income was barely paying the rent. We were depending on my mom, who was elderly, to cover the bills. And when that wasn't there anymore, I couldn't afford anything. It really brought a huge battle of depression to me. There's still not a day that goes by that I don't wish that I could die and be with her.
Mickey says she didn't know where she was going to get her next meal, bathe herself, get through the night on the street, or if the police were going to chase her off someone's doorstep. What was the toughest part of being out on the street?
Instability.
Was the key to your survival getting housing, sustainable housing?
Yes, because I had no faith and belief in myself. It gave me back my dignity and my self-respect. And that's the main thing out here, is we have to do that. We have to let people know that they are worthy and they're not just bodies of flesh.
Jackie Vorhauer is with Skid Row Housing Trust in Los Angeles. Vorhauer works to educate the public on homelessness and sustainable housing solutions. Skid Row Housing Trust has been around for about 30 years as a nonprofit developer. They build affordable, permanent supportive housing for people who are exiting homelessness. The agency also provides on-site services like case management, life skills training, counseling, health clinics, and mental health help. 3 decades ago, Skid Row Housing Trust started buying many of the old, dilapidated buildings in and around downtown LA with the hopes of saving them and turning them into affordable housing for homeless and low-income folks.
A more sustainable model is to do more permanent supportive housing, which is supplying homes for people, but with all the services on site that they need to not only break the cycle of homelessness, but to try to address issues where we can break the cycle of poverty, where we can address mental and physical and emotional illness, and really get people up to a more self-sustainable, self-reliant mode. What's important about not just building housing, but building sustainable housing is that homelessness needs to be addressed now, but we also need to make sure that the model is addressing homelessness 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. The sustainable model brings everything to people. We have 26 buildings in total right now. 24 of them are in downtown Los Angeles. Our buildings are home to nearly 2,000 people. So that's 2,000 people that are off the streets. What that does not include are the hundreds and possibly thousands of people that over the years have become so much more self-reliant and self-sustainable. It's not just a Band-Aid for the time being. This is a long-term sustainable solution.
So if this is the solution, why aren't there more of these sustainable models throughout Los Angeles? That question is complicated. This is Stephanie Pincel, a sustainability scientist. Pincel is with the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. She is also the director of the California Center for Sustainable Communities. When you've got a homeless population of, say, 60 or 70,000 people, how do you even begin to deal with it?
Right, so let's flip that question on its head. In Los Angeles County, there are 10 million people. In the city of LA, there are 4 million people. What's 60,000 people? How come we can't even manage to build enough housing for 60,000 people in a region where there are 10 million people? I think we're looking at the problem backwards. We're not thinking about where we can build affordable and decent long-term permanent housing for people who live in the region. And that involves looking at why housing is so expensive. And that means that more and more people in many cities across the world are becoming homeless because the price of real estate has gotten so high. That's an enormous sustainability question for cities today, because people need to live in places where there's employment, where there's activity, where their children can go to school, where there's good services, and that happens to be largely in cities.
Who is to blame for allowing this pandemic of homelessness in Los Angeles escalate the way it has?
That's a really complicated and difficult question. We are all, to some extent, responsible. And sustainability really involves everyone thinking about how we live together well.
The big issue really does get back to supply.
Rob Jernigan is trying to be part of the solution of homelessness and housing. Jernigan is an architect and a regional manager of Gensler Architects, an international company located in downtown Los Angeles designing hundreds of projects around the world. Gensler has been working on projects in Southern California for the last 30 years, and more recently, the company has been working with places like Skid Row Housing Trust, homeless advocacy organizations, and the city of LA to try and design and help build sustainable housing for the homeless. Jernigan says, until now, this has not been an easy task.
For me, the real issue is most every project, at least major size projects in the state of California, are required to go through CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. And what that really does is that looks at the impacts, the environmental impacts that a project is having. But what it also does is it adds an amount of time to a project that it takes, and frankly an amount of cost to projects. And I think with regards to housing, what that's doing is that's really slowing down the supply and increasing the cost. Developers are required in this state to actually manage or mitigate the different impacts that project may have. So they're not passing it on to the typical citizen. They really are bearing those costs.
When you are talking about homelessness and sustainable housing, it is much more than just bearing costs. It is often asked, who bears the blame for having a city with tens of thousands of homeless people, with that number increasing on a yearly basis? I interviewed you a few years ago when you had first declared Los Angeles a state of emergency for homelessness, and you were proud of the fact that you were going to be getting, I believe it was about $150 million a year to try to combat the problem. And yet all the critics are still saying it's getting worse and worse and nothing's being done.
Oh, I agree that it's gotten worse. I think, a city is at the receiving end of all the failed policies and social ills that contribute to homelessness. City of Los Angeles didn't make opioids cheaper. We don't control the jails or the prisons that are releasing people. We didn't declare war on other countries and have the trauma of people returning from there, and we don't control the foster care system. All these things, which are an epidemic, are really what drove people on the streets. They might have suffered with that trauma in a cheaper housing unit before. Where the city does bear responsibility is we need to make sure there's more housing built.
Garcetti believes he and his city are making a difference in trying to get homeless folks and low-income folks sustainable housing throughout LA.
I set a very ambitious goal here in LA to build 100,000 units of housing just in the city of LA, which is a somewhat artificial island in a region of 12 million, 13 million people. But to do that, that would be our part. And we're going to hit that goal. And we probably need more than 100,000 units. So we need affordable rental units, we need subsidized units for those who would be on the brink of homelessness, and we need permanent supportive housing for those who are on the streets today, who might have the deepest trauma and need a permanent place to live.
And yet, why has it been so slow to accomplish this?
So I think people said, oh my gosh, the traffic's so bad here in West Los Angeles, the traffic's so bad here in the San Fernando Valley, don't build any more housing. when in reality we needed to build more housing to accommodate that. To make housing more affordable, we have to have a more innovative way and cheaper and quicker way to build.
Mayor Garcetti and others are working on what they believe is the best sustainable model for housing the homeless. Rob Jernigan explains.
One of the things that we're a huge advocate for is prefabricated modular units. You're going to see us start doing a lot of those, and that will speed up the efficiency and hence reduce the cost, which I think can help us with both the affordable and the homeless issue.
What type of housing would be best to give that supply?
We're looking at a couple different models. We are looking at the typical bed, bath, kitchen model, but one of the issues with a kitchen, besides the kitchen's expensive, a kitchen requires a lot of utensils and plates and pots and pans and glasses and stuff to operate a kitchen, okay? So they're very expensive. So the other model that we're also looking at is a bed and a bath that would have a refrigerator, but then there would be a common kitchen. But then the third model that I think we also have to look at is what we call the dormitory model, and it's really just bed with common bath and common kitchen. And so we really want to provide different models with different costs for different sectors, and frankly, give people options.
What we can do is build this net that catches everybody. Says, tell me who you are, tell me what your story is.
Mickey is telling her story because now she has sustainable housing.
If you show someone a little dignity and respect and give them a chance and let them know they're worthy of your attention, they'll get off the streets. Show them they're worth it.
I'll keep my hand here on your back. I will move it while you sleep. The shaking hours have settled down.